Well, with me today for this edition of Audio App is Mike Hannewald. Mike's field agronomist for Becks up in Michigan. And Mike, as we were talking, you've done some interesting things. We've got 15 years worth of planting date data for corn and soybeans. And we know that when you look at both crops, that ideal window tends to be that last week of April, right? That 2-week window, last week of April, first week of May. But you dug into the data a little deeper and had some interesting learnings. Tell us a little bit about what you found.
Yeah, Jim. So it's pretty neat when you've got 15 years of data. You can really play with that data and do some different analysis, and that's exactly what we did here. So we wanted to look at not just when's the best time to plant, but what's the consistency of the best time to plant from one year to another. And so we did that with both corn and soybeans. And how I broke it out was I looked at 2-week time frame. So the second half of March, then all the way to the first half of June, and broke everything out into 2 weeks. And we looked at how many times did each of those time frames have the highest yield in the plot that year, and then how many times did it have the lowest yield. And so it's pretty revealing what we saw. And so if you look at our corn planting chart here, you see that it's fairly inconsistent. So we've got wins in all 6 of those time frames. And you look at that April 16th to 30th, so over 15 years, that's when we've got the best yield. And we have 2 wins and no losses, but we have wins in every one of those time frames. I think any farmer can relate to that because we can all think of that one year that our June planted corn was the best corn that we had that year, and that's exactly what we're seeing here.
And as I look at this graph, right, if there's 15 years of data, I should have 15 years worth of red bars and 15 years worth of green bars, right?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. So what can I deduct from this?
So how I would take it is if you're going to really push the envelope, maybe for some of our southern territories and plant in the second half of March there, just look at that one. That tells you that 2 years out of 15 we had a win, and then 2 years out of 15 that was the loss. So you got about a 50-50 shot of that working out. Whereas you move into some of the later planting dates, odds are a little bit better. But really, corn, it's about planting conditions and it's about getting a stand. And if we can get a stand and get every seed up out of the ground into a plant, that gives us our best yield potential. And then ultimately, our biggest yield determining factor is pollination timing, and we have no control over that. Just have to wait and see how it turns out. So
interestingly, though, when I look at the soybean data, something different. This is what you discovered. Tell me about it.
Very different story here. So the soybean data is much more consistent that the early planting dates win far more often. And you see that the first half of April, 6 wins, no losses. And it kind of trends downward from there, that our best yield potential for soybeans seems to be the early planted beans. And you look there at June, almost all of our losses came from June planted soybeans as far as our lowest yielding in those years. And it's interesting because back to, every farmer can think of the year that June planted corn was his best corn, but I don't know of a single farmer who can think of his June planted beans being the best beans. This really tells the story.
Yeah, that's a pretty linear trend. Now, do you feel like this is probably like getting more nodes developed and capturing more sunlight earlier? Why do you think we're seeing that trend?
So I think it's the difference in how corn and soybeans, how they mature and reproduce. And so with corn, it's all about heat units, and it takes a set number of heat units regardless of when you plant. Where in soybeans, it's got that date that when the days start to get shorter, they're going to start flowering regardless of how far along in vegetative growth they are. So if we can get more of that vegetative growth done prior to the summer solstice around June 21st, when flowering typically occurs, that means that in the reproductive stages, the soybeans can be focused a lot more on reproductive growth, so flowers, pods, and seeds, and less on trying to grow taller and more leaves and stems.
And we know more vegetative growth equates to more nodes, and more nodes, in theory, would give us more pods, etc.
Correct.
So what's the take-home? How do I understand these 2 slides then if I'm a grower?
So I think the take-home is think about, I think it still supports our recommendation we've been suggesting for a while, that if you can plant corn and beans at the same time, you should be doing that. But not every farm's set up to be able to do that. And so if you can only plant one or the other, it might make sense to start with some beans before you plant some corn. That's one option. The other thing is if you've got the opportunity to go out and plant early, and I know that no farmer ever plants in tough conditions, but if you ever feel the pressure to plant in tough conditions, soybeans might be the crop to plant because they might be able to handle some of those tough conditions. If you don't get every seed up, it's okay because the soybeans can compensate, whereas corn can't. And so I think I think that's the ultimate takeaway is that you might be okay pushing the envelope a little bit on soybeans to get them out there earlier and capture some more of that longer growing season and more yield benefit.
And especially as it relates to Becks with Escalate yield enhancement system, we've got some extra protection as well.
Correct.
Fantastic. Mike, really appreciate the insight. It's really neat to see how you dug into this data and pulled some additional learnings out of 15 years worth of PFR data. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks a lot. Glad to help.
All right. That's this edition of Audio App. Stay tuned for our next edition. Have a great day, everybody.